Okay, in this video, what I am doing is running through a quick example of how we can use buttons and simple methods to make our Java program interactive. So you'll recall earlier in the unit, we began by learning how to create a JFrame with a JPanel and put components on that panel. And so in this starter code, I have a very basic JFrame. So before I get there, I need to have my import statements, and the javax.swing.asterisk, that's just to get all of those classes of the Swing library that we might want to be using. These next two, the action event and action listener, those classes are necessary to allow us to have the buttons be responsive. So in here, what I have is, just that basic code we started with before, the JFrame. We set the size, we gave it a title, we told it what to do when we close. After that, we created a panel. Now notice for all of these, each of these lines of code, we've been talking quite a bit about creating objects. And we said how we have the class name, the variable name equals new, and then the call to the constructor. And this constructor is going to create a new JPanel object called myPanel. So in this example, I first made a JFrame called window. Then I made a JPanel called myPanel. I made two JText fields called num1 and num2, and I set their column width to be 10, so I could take 10 characters. Then I created two buttons, my button and my button 2. And this part here in the quotations is the text that's displayed on the button. So there are different constructors for the JButton. You can either create it like this, where it's empty, and then you can set the text later, or you can do it all at once in the constructor. And then lastly, I created a JLabel, and the purpose of this JLabel is to display the answer. Now, JLabels can be used to have information appear on your panel, or you can use them to label text fields so that the user knows what they're supposed to enter in those text fields. All right, now after we create each of these items, we now need to add them to the panel. So remember, just because we built the objects doesn't mean that we see them anywhere. So this is where we add them all to the label. Now, currently, I don't have any specific layout attached to this panel. If I would have created a layout and defined a specific layout and then added it to my JPanel, then these components would add in a different way. Since I did not give a specific layout, the default is just to go boom, 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 and just lay them out in order and then wrap it around and so forth. So the order of these components will be text field, button, button, label. Now that my panel is all set up, I need to add my panel to my window. And then finally, I need to make my window visible. Remember, we talked about the fact that the JFrame by default is not visible. All right, so when we go ahead and set this all up, we are going to have a basic looking JFrame. So let me go ahead and run the program and show you what this looks like before we see what the actions do. First of all, I apologize. This resolution on my computer is so tiny that this box is so little. However, for display purposes, you can get the point of what's there. So this allows me to enter into my two text fields. So I can enter 5, and we'll tap over and do 10, and then pop-up answer. And what's going to happen is these two values are going to be mathematically added, and I can see here the sum of 5 plus 10 equals 15. The other option I can do is I can display the answer in my label. Now currently my label is kind of showing up over here on the right. However, once I have this label is longer, now the items have to readjust so that way there's room for it. So like I said, I did not put a specific layout here. Everything just kind of goes with the flow and fills the JFrame as it fills it. All right, so now let's look at the code that's necessary to make these buttons interactive. On the second page of the handout, what I did was I essentially told you how to write the action listeners and attach them to the buttons. Now, we have yet to see code like this before, and in order to use it, there's several parts that you don't really need to understand. Let me show you what I mean. So my button.addActionListener is basically telling it that I want it to be actively listening for something to happen. And when I say new action listener, here I am actually going to create a new action listener. And then here I am creating a method inside of this method call, which is something we've never done before. And outside of graphics, I don't think we will do it all this year. However, it gets the job done. So if you wanted to implement something like this, these first 2 lines of code, you would essentially leave exactly the same. And then the part that we have here inside the curly braces, that's where I have the actual code that the method is going to do. So first, I am going to get an integer, then I get another integer, then this JOptionPane.show message dialog, null, comma, that essentially gives me a pop-up window. Again, this whole first part, we just need to have it as is, and then the part that I see inside the quotes, that's going to be the string of text that we are building up to show in the pop-up box. Now, this part that's in here, we talked a little bit about different types of data, and the text field by default, when the value is gotten from the text field, it is a string text. Even if it's numeric, it's still string. So this part right here that says num1.getText is going to get the text in the text field and returns it as a string. However, we want to use it as an integer. So what we have to do is we have to parse that string into an integer. And in order to do that, we call the parseInt method of the integer class. Now, based on the way that this method call is written, we should be able to see that parseInt is a static method of the integer class. So recall we talked about this with our math class. We talked about how static methods do not need an object in order for them to be called. Instead, they are called by class name, and that's what we see going on here. Now, this other method down here for button 2 is very similar. We'll notice the exact same text here to get the integers. We see very similar text here, similar code to build up the string that's going to go into the label. And then to display that text in the label, I can just say the label name dot set text and then whatever I want it to be. I could have just put all of this text right here. I just wanted to demonstrate another way that we could have this work. I believe that's all. Yeah, so let's see what else I had down here. I mentioned the other 2 import statements, and so this here was just a little bit more explanation of what I had in the handout. But the key elements is that we can have a method with these 2 lines of code attached to a button. And if we want to take data from a text field and use it numerically, we have to parse it into a number. And then we can either have things show up in a pop-up box, or we can have the values displayed in a JLabel on our JFrame. All right, all of the files that go along with this video will be in our folder on Schoology.